Caleb Morgan hadn't spoken to another human being in 43 days. He rode into Bitter Creek for flour, salt, and wire. He did not ride in for trouble. But when he heard the auctioneer's voice cutting through the summer heat, Widow Harper and her infant son offered for labor repayment, opening bid $30. Something inside him went very, very still. He looked at the woman standing barefoot on those wooden planks. He looked at the baby pressed against her chest. Then he reached into his saddlebag. If that opening stopped you cold, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel, follow every part of this story to the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1883 arrived in Bitter Creek like a punishment. The heat came down hard and flat, the kind that dried the creek beds to cracked mud and turned the air above the main street into something you could almost see shimmer and writhe. Flies were bad. Tempers were worse. And on the third Saturday of July, the town of Bitter Creek gathered in front of the land office the way towns gather for events that make decent people ashamed and indecent people rich. They came for the auction. Caleb Morgan had not come for the auction. He'd ridden down from the high country the night before, made camp 2 miles east of town, and arrived at first light with a short list of supplies and no interest in conversation. He was a large man, not in a showy way, but in the quiet, functional way of someone who has moved heavy things alone for a long time. His coat was trail-worn. His hat had taken too much weather. He hadn't shaved since May, and he didn't plan to start. He tied his horse at the far end of the hitching post outside the general store and went inside. Josiah Pratt, who ran the store, was standing at his front window instead of behind his counter. "What do you need?" Caleb said. Josiah didn't turn around. "Flour's on the left shelf, salt's below it." "I see that." Caleb pulled a cloth sack from his coat. "You going to weigh it, or do I guess?" "Just watch what you pour." Josiah still hadn't moved from the window. His voice had something wrong in it, not grief exactly, more like the particular discomfort of a man watching something he knows is wrong, and has already decided not to stop. Caleb set the flour on the scale. He weighed the salt. He set coins on the counter without being asked. And then, because he was already at the window to leave, he looked out. The crowd had gathered maybe 60 feet away in front of the land office steps. 20, maybe 25 people. A few women at the back. Most of the men up front. And on the steps, on a rough wooden platform that looked like it had been built sometime last week and would fall apart by next month, stood a woman. She was young. Or she had been young not long ago. She was holding an infant against her chest with both arms crossed over him, like she was trying to make herself into a wall between the baby and everything else. Her feet were bare on the raw wood. Her dress was the dress of someone who had been wearing the same thing for too many days in the same heat. Her hair was loose in the humidity. She was not crying. That was the thing Caleb noticed first. She was not crying. She was standing very still, the way people stand when they've already cried everything they had, and what's left on the other side of crying is something harder and colder and quieter. The auctioneer was a man named Dillard Voss, a thick, self-important type who handled estate sales and debt repayments for the county magistrate and seemed to find considerable satisfaction in both. He was reading from a paper. By order of the Honorable Magistrate Greer, in accordance with Territorial Debt Statute 41, the labor and domestic service of the widow, Evelyn Harper, age 26, and her infant son William, approximately 4 months old, are hereby offered for repayment of outstanding debts owed to the creditors of the late Thomas Harper, deceased. Caleb stopped walking. He stood in the doorway of the general store, and he stopped. Opening bid. Voss continued with the practiced cadence of a man who'd done this before, is set at $30 for a term of 18 months. Service terms are negotiable with winning bidder. The widow is in adequate health. The child is... He paused, consulting his paper. Present. Laughter from somewhere in the crowd. Not everyone, but enough. Evelyn Harper's arms tightened around her son. She did not look at the crowd. She looked at a fixed point somewhere above the rooftop across the street, and she held it the way a drowning person holds a rope. The baby made a thin sound against her chest. Not quite a cry. more like an exhausted complaint from a very small person who had run out of energy for full crying and was doing what he could with what he had left. $30? Said a voice from the left side of the crowd. A man named Hollis who owned 3 sections of land south of town and was always looking for a fourth way to use someone else's labor. 35? Said another voice. 40? Caleb was still standing in the doorway. He was watching Evelyn Harper's face. She had heard the bids. He could tell by the slight shift in her jaw the way she swallowed once and then locked her expression back down into that hard, still place she'd built for herself. She was counting. He could see it in her eyes. She was counting bids the way prisoners count days. Not because the number mattered, because counting something gave you a small private control over a situation that had taken everything else. 45, said Hollis again louder. Dillard Voss smiled. We have 45 from Mr. Hollis. Do I hear 50? A pause. Then a man in a brown coat near the steps, someone Caleb didn't recognize, said, 50. But only for the woman, not the child. Evelyn's head moved. Just slightly. A small involuntary flinch. Then she corrected it. Voss looked at his paper. The terms of sale include both. I ain't paying for a nursing infant, the man in the brown coat said flatly. I need a domestic worker, not a nursemaid operation. Separate the woman. Put the child with county. Now hold on, Josiah Pratt said from behind Caleb. He'd finally moved from the window. His voice was uncomfortable, the voice of a man trying to object without committing to an objection. That ain't, you can't just... Statute 41 allows for separation of dependents at the discretion of the buyer, Voss said, reading now from a lower section of his paper. In cases where the dependent is not the subject of the primary debt obligation. He's a baby, a woman's voice said from the back of the crowd. He's a liability. The man in the brown coat replied without turning around. Evelyn Harper finally looked down. She looked down at the top of her son's head, at the dark, damp hair, the fragile weight of him against her chest, and something crossed her face that was worse than crying. Something that was past the point where crying is still possible. Something that was the face of a person being asked to hand over the last thing they have left, and being told by law and paper, and the particular cruelty of orderly process, that they don't have a choice. Her lips moved. No sound came out. Then sound came. No. Her voice was quiet and cracked at the edges. No, you're not taking him. You're not, I will work. I will work whatever terms you set. But you are not taking my son. Ma'am, Voss said, with the particular patience of a man who considers patience a form of power. This is a legal proceeding. Your preferences have been... I said no. The baby startled at her voice. His head turned against her chest. His small hand found a fistful of her dress and gripped it. The man in the brown coat looked at Voss. Separate them and I'll go to 60. Caleb Morgan stepped off the porch. He didn't move fast. There was nothing dramatic about it. He simply stepped off the porch and walked across the street with the same steady, unhurried movement he used for everything tracking a deer, reading a ridgeline, crossing a river at a ford he'd tested before. He moved like a man who has already made a decision and is now simply completing it. He stopped at the edge of the crowd. A few people turned. He was large enough and still enough that turning to look at him was a natural response. What's the full amount? He said. Voss looked at him. I beg your pardon. The debt. The total outstanding debt that this sale is meant to repay. What's the number? Voss looked back at his paper. Looked back at Caleb. The outstanding sum owed to the creditor consortium of Bitter Creek, including principal interest as accrued and administrative fees, is $63.40. And if that sum is paid in full, Caleb said, the legal basis for this sale is dissolved. A pause. Voss adjusted his collar. That is technically correct, however the costs of... Is it correct or isn't it? Voss straightened his paper. It is correct. All right. Caleb reached into the inside pocket of his coat and removed a leather bag. He walked to the base of the steps. He set the bag on the edge of the platform directly in front of Dillard Voss and pulled the drawstring open. Gold coin, not dust. Coin. Voss stared at it. The crowd went very quiet. "Count it," Caleb said. "You'll find $65. The difference covers your administrative fees and whatever paperwork you need to file to close this out cleanly." He looked at Voss without any readable expression. "Do it now, in front of witnesses." Voss looked at the bag, looked at the crowd, looked at the man in the brown coat, who had stopped looking bored and was now looking something more complicated. "This is," Voss began. "Legal," Caleb said. "Yes, it is. Statute 41, same as you quoted. Debt repayment in full dissolves all associated labor claims. You can look it up if you need to, but I reckon you already know it." He met Voss's eyes. "Count the money." Voss counted the money. It took 3 minutes. The crowd was silent for all three of them. Hollis cleared his throat from somewhere to the left. "Now hold on. That man's got no standing here. He ain't a creditor. He's got $65, said old Emmett Ware from the back, a rancher who'd been in this territory since before Hollis was born and had never liked him. "Seems like that's all the standing the law requires." Hollis looked around for support. He found less than he was hoping for. Voss finished counting. He folded the paper in his hands with the careful, deliberate movements of a man who has been caught doing something legal but not decent and is trying to restore his professional dignity. The sum is confirmed. In accordance with territorial statute, the debt obligation of the Harper estate is hereby discharged. The labor sale is concluded. He said the last word like it had cost him something. The man in the brown coat picked up his hat from where he'd been holding it, looked at Caleb once with an expression that was not quite a threat, but was in the neighborhood of one, and walked away. The crowd began to dissolve. Not quickly. With the slow, sideways movement of people who want to see what happens next, but don't want to be seen wanting to see it. Caleb turned and looked up at Evelyn Harper. She was standing on the platform still. She hadn't moved. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read, something between relief and a wariness that hadn't had time to decide whether it was warranted. The baby was quiet against her chest. His eyes were open and unfocused in the way of very young infants seeing light and shape without names for any of it. "Ma'am," Caleb said, "I don't—" She stopped. Started again. Her voice was steadier than he expected. "I don't know what you want from me." "I want you off those steps," he said. "It's not a dignified place to stand." She looked at the steps. Then slowly she came down them. She was barefoot, and the ground between the steps and where he stood was rough dirt, scattered gravel. She navigated it without looking down, keeping her eyes on him the whole time, the way you watch something you're not sure about. She stopped about 4 feet from him. "My name is Evelyn Harper," she said. "This is William." "I know," Caleb said. "Caleb Morgan." He looked at the baby for a moment, then back at her. "You got anything in town? Belongings?" She almost laughed. The sound came out wrong, short and dry, and on the edge of something that wasn't laughter at all. No, the creditors took the house 2 weeks ago. I've been staying at the church. I have a bag there. Small bag. Go get it." She hesitated. "Mr. Morgan, I have to ask you. I have to know what—" "You'll have time to ask questions later," he said. "Right now, I want to be out of this town before Hollis decides he's got grounds to make things complicated. So go get your bag, Mrs. Harper. We're leaving." She looked at him for a long moment. He waited. He was good at waiting. "All right," she said. She went to the church. He went to his horse. When she came back, she had a canvas bag slung over one shoulder, the baby in her arms, and the same watchful expression she'd been wearing since she came down the steps. She'd put on shoes, worn cracked things that had seen better years, but shoes. She stopped in front of his horse and looked up at the animal, then at him. "I've never ridden much," she said. "I know." He took the bag from her shoulder without asking and secured it behind the saddle. He looked at the baby. "Can you hold him and hold the horn?" "Yes." "Then we're fine." He helped her up, one hand cupped under her elbow. No ceremony, purely functional, and then mounted behind her. It was practical. The horse was a big animal, steady and trail-trained. There was room. Evelyn sat very straight. She was trying not to touch him more than the saddle required. He understood that and said nothing about it. "Where are we going?" she asked. "North," he said. "That's not an answer." "It's the start of one," he said. "We'll get to the rest." He turned the horse and rode out of Bitter Creek. Nobody tried to stop them. Hollis watched from the porch of the land office, arms crossed, hat pushed back. Voss had already gone inside. The woman from the back of the crowd, the one who'd said he's a baby, was standing in front of the dry goods store watching them go. She raised one hand briefly as Evelyn passed. Evelyn saw it. She didn't raise her hand back, but something shifted in her face for a moment, something that wasn't quite hope, but was in the same general territory. The edge of town gave way to open road dry grass, the smell of heat and dust and distant pine. The mountains were north. They rose blue and enormous against the summer sky, still capped in places with snow that wouldn't melt until August. William made a small sound and turned his face against his mother's collarbone. "He needs to eat soon," Evelyn said, her voice careful and neutral. "And I need to stop when it's appropriate. He hasn't been eating well." "There's a creek about 6 miles up," Caleb said. "Good shade. We'll stop there." "All right." "He's sick." She hesitated. "I don't know. He cries less than he should. He's not hungry enough. That worries me more than the crying." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "We'll stop at the creek. There's time." She didn't answer. They rode in silence for a while. The road climbed gradually north. The heat pressed down without apology. Evelyn sat very straight in the saddle, one arm tight around the baby, her free hand on the horn. She had good balance, better than she'd claimed. After about a mile, she spoke. "I'm not going to ask you to explain yourself right now," she said. "I understand you may not want to, but I'm going to ask one thing." "Go ahead. Did you do what you did back there? Did you do it because you wanted something from me, or because you—" She stopped, chose her words. "Because it was wrong, what they were doing. It was wrong." He didn't answer immediately. The horse's hooves made their steady rhythm on the packed dirt. "It was wrong," he said finally. She nodded once, a small private nod, like she was confirming something to herself. "Okay," she said. "Okay." The road curved north, and the mountains grew larger ahead of them, and Bitter Creek fell away behind them and was gone. Evelyn Harper held her son against her chest and felt him breathe small and alive and still hear, and did not cry. She had cried everything she had. What was left, she was going to need. The creek was exactly where he said it would be. Caleb didn't announce it. He simply pulled the horse to a stop, dismounted, and reached up to help Evelyn down before she had time to figure out how to manage it herself with the baby in her arms. His hands were steady and impersonal, the kind of grip that communicates nothing except functional competence. She landed on her feet. The ground was softer here, close to the water, grass instead of packed dirt. "Sit," he said. "Not a request. You're about to fall over." "I'm fine. You haven't eaten today." It wasn't a question. She didn't deny it. She sat down in the grass near the bank and adjusted William against her chest. He was awake, barely, his eyes half open in that glazed, conserving way that had been worrying her for 3 days. She'd been telling herself it was the heat. She'd been telling herself a lot of things. Caleb tied the horse and crouched beside the saddlebag. He pulled out dried meat, a cloth-wrapped block of something dense, a canteen. He set them on the ground beside her without looking at her. "Eat," he said. "Mr. Morgan." "Caleb." She stopped. "Caleb, William needs to eat first. He's not taking enough, and I think it's because I haven't had enough food myself to—" She stopped again. Her jaw tightened. "I'm having trouble feeding him. The way a mother feeds an infant. There isn't enough." He was quiet for a moment. Then he sat back on his heels and looked at the baby with the same focused attention he'd given the auctioneer's paper earlier, assessing. "How long?" he said. 4 days, maybe 5. "Is he running a fever?" She pressed her lips to William's forehead. "No, not yet." "Then he's hungry, not sick." He pulled the canteen and set it directly in her hand. "Drink all of it, I'll refill it. You don't produce what you don't take in, and he doesn't get better until you do." She drank. It took effort not to drink it all in 10 seconds, which would have made her sick. She paced herself, and it cost her something to do it. "There's a trading post about 3 miles further north," he said while she drank. "Older woman who runs it, May Dunbar. She keeps goats. I'll get milk. Something to supplement until you're better supplied yourself." Evelyn lowered the canteen. She looked at him. "You've thought about this before," she said. "I thought about it when I heard him." "When did you hear him?" "Before I went into the store." She absorbed that. "You heard him crying from across the street." "Yes. And you went into the store first." Something shifted in his face. Not guilt exactly. More like honest acknowledgement. "I went in to buy flour. I didn't know what was happening outside. When I looked out the window..." He paused. "I didn't go in the store planning to buy flour and come out having paid $65 in gold coin." "No," she said. "I don't suppose you did." She gave him the canteen back and he refilled it from the creek, using a cloth to filter it the way someone does who has drunk from mountain water long enough to know what it can carry. She ate the dried meat slowly. The dense block turned out to be some kind of pressed grain and fat, not pleasant, but caloric and real. William made a small frustrated sound against her, and she shifted him and tried again. And this time something worked that hadn't been working well for days, and she felt the relief of it move through her like heat. She didn't look up at Caleb. This was not a moment she wanted witnessed. He seemed to understand that. He walked to the horse and checked the saddle straps with unnecessary thoroughness for about 5 minutes. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. "I need to understand what I owe you." He came back and sat not close, but within conversation distance. He picked up a small stone from the bank and turned it in his fingers. "Nothing." "That isn't possible. $65 is mine to spend how I choose." "Caleb." She said his name deliberately, like a tool she was using. "I am not a charity case. I will not be in debt to someone whose motives I don't understand. I was already in debt I couldn't repay. I watched what that does. I watched what people do with that kind of power. So I am asking you plainly, what is this? What am I to you right now? What are you expecting?" He looked at her directly. His eyes were dark gray, steady, the kind of eyes that have spent a lot of time reading landscape and have transferred that habit to people. "Nothing you aren't willing to give," he said. "And right now the only thing I want from you is for you to finish that food, and let me get you both to higher ground before Hollis figures out that I'm not actually any kind of legal authority, and there's nothing stopping him from coming up the road after us." That landed. Evelyn's head came up. "He wouldn't..." "He's a man who just lost something he wanted at a price he was willing to pay," Caleb said. "In my experience, that type doesn't let things go easy." She looked back toward the road. The road was empty. That didn't mean much. "How far is your... Where are we going exactly?" "I have a cabin," he said. "High country, about a day-and-a-half ride from here." "A day and a half?" She looked at William, at her own worn shoes, at the state of her dress. "With a 4-month-old. We'll pace it for him, stop when he needs it. And when we get there, you'll have a roof and a door that locks, and food that doesn't come from charity. After that," he dropped the stone. "After that, we figure out the rest." She looked at him for a long time. He let her look. He didn't try to fill the silence with reassurance, which she was beginning to realize was unusual. Most men filled silences. It was a kind of territorial behavior, occupy the air before someone else does. Caleb Morgan apparently had no interest in that particular territory. "All right," she said. "Let's go." They made it to May Dunbar's trading post before the sun moved too far west. The post was a low, solid building that had survived enough seasons to earn a kind of stubborn authority. May herself was a woman of perhaps 65 who came out onto the porch before they'd fully stopped, wiped her hands on her apron, and looked at Evelyn and the baby with the specific sharp assessment of a woman who has seen trouble arrive on horseback before and knows how to read it. "Caleb Morgan," she said, "you look like you've done something drastic." "I need goat's milk," he said. "Whatever you can spare, and anything else you've got for an infant." May came down the steps and looked at William without asking permission. She put one weathered hand against his cheek, checked his eyes, pressed 2 fingers gently to his neck. "He's hungry," she said. "Not sick. There's a difference, though. The end result looks similar enough to scare you." She looked at Evelyn. "You his mother?" "Yes, ma'am." "You eating?" "Starting to." May made a sound that was not quite approval, but in that direction. "Come inside." Inside the trading post, she moved with the efficiency of someone who doesn't waste time on sentiment when practical action is available. She produced a small clay jar of goat's milk, warmed it at the stove, and showed Evelyn how to coax William into taking it from a dampened cloth. Not a bottle, but workable patient. Something a tired woman in a difficult situation could manage. William took it. He took it badly at first, frustrated, turning his head, making thin, outraged sounds at the indignity of the method. And then hunger won the way. Hunger always wins, and he went quiet and intent, and began to eat. Evelyn sat at May's table and watched her son eat, and said nothing for a while. May set a cup of coffee in front of her without asking, then sat across from her and looked at Caleb, who was standing near the door. "Where'd you find her?" "Bitter Creek," he said. "Dead auction." May's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes went very flat and cold. "Voss running that still?" "Yes." "They auctioned the boy too?" "They tried." May looked at Evelyn. Her voice when she spoke again was not soft exactly, but it had been moved to a quieter register. "You got people anywhere?" "Family?" "No, ma'am. My husband's family is in Ohio. We weren't there, wasn't much contact. My own family is gone." "Then you're starting from scratch?" "Yes, ma'am." "That's not the worst position," May said. "Starting from scratch means you don't have to carry old weight." She stood and went back to the stove. "I'll pack you what I can spare. Milk for the boy. Dried goods. I've got a wool blanket that's better than what you're carrying." "I can pay." Caleb started. "You've already spent enough today," May said without looking at him. "Call it a trade on account of me not having to see what that auction might have produced if you hadn't ridden in when you did." She looked at him over her shoulder. "I heard about Thomas Harper dying. I knew it would go badly for her. Town like Bitter Creek doesn't leave a young widow with a baby in peace. There's always someone counting what they can take." Caleb said nothing. "You doing the right thing is all well and good," May continued, and now her voice had an edge in it, not hostile, but direct, the way of a woman who has earned the right to say exactly what she means. But right doesn't always stay easy. That baby needs consistent feeding for the next 2 weeks at minimum. That woman needs rest and food and something resembling stability. You got a plan for those things up in that mountain cabin of yours?" "I'm working on it," Caleb said. "Work faster." She packed a saddlebag's worth of supplies. Evelyn tried to help, and May put her back in the chair with a look that brooked no argument, and Evelyn, too tired and too relieved to fight it, stayed in the chair and held William and let herself be taken care of for 7 minutes, which was about as long as she trusted herself to do it, without losing something she needed to keep. When they rode out, the sun was lower, and the air was beginning its slow concession toward evening cool. The road north narrowed, and the trees thickened on both sides, and the mountains stopped being a distant promise and started being a present reality, big and close and permanent, in a way that was either comforting or terrifying, depending on what you brought to them. Evelyn brought exhaustion and weariness, and a baby who had eaten and was now asleep with the abrupt totality of very young infants gone from half awake to unconscious without apparent transition. She rode, and she thought. "May seems to know you well," she said after a long silence. "She's known me about 8 years. She called you by your full name when we rode up. She calls everyone by their full name. She says first names alone are too easy to forget. Evelyn thought about that. She doesn't think much of what's happening in Bitter Creek. May doesn't think much of injustice in any specific location, he said. It's a general position. What about you? A pause. The horse moved steadily. What about me? Do you have a general position? Or was today a specific reaction? He considered this with the same unhurried attention he gave most things. I reckon, he said finally, that I have a low tolerance for watching something wrong happen when I've got the means to stop it. That's either very honorable, Evelyn said, or very dangerous. Can be both. Has it been both before? Yes. She waited to see if he would elaborate. He didn't. She filed it under things she would ask about later when later existed. They made camp before full dark at a flat stretch of ground where the trees offered wind shelter and the creek ran close enough to hear. Caleb set up the bedroll. He had a second blanket, now supplemented by maize wool, and built a fire that was efficient and small, the kind of fire a man builds when he doesn't want to be seen from a distance. Evelyn noticed that. Are you expecting someone to follow us? She asked. He was arranging the fire with a stick, not looking at her. I'm always cautious. Doesn't mean I'm expecting something. Hollis said, I know what Hollis said. He sat back. The firelight moved on his face. He looked tired, she realized. He was large and composed and controlled, and she had stopped thinking of him as someone who got tired. But he'd ridden a long way before Bitter Creek, and a long way after it, and paid $65 out of savings that didn't fall from the sky, and he was tired. Hollis is a man who makes noise. Men who make noise are less dangerous than men who go quiet. He made a lot of noise back there. He also had friends in that crowd. Some of them, not all. He looked at her. You noticed. I was standing on a platform being auctioned, she said. I noticed everything. Something moved in his expression. Not pity. She would have resented pity. Something more like recognition. The man in the brown coat, she said. The one who wanted to separate me from William. Who was he? I don't know. You didn't recognize him? No. Which means he wasn't local. Which means someone sent him or he came for a specific purpose. He met her eyes. Which means Hollis had arranged more than just his own bid before the auction. The implications settled over Evelyn like cold water. They planned it, she said. They knew Thomas was dead. They knew about the debt. They knew the law, Caleb said. Statute 41 isn't a secret. Men like that learn what tools are available and they use them. She stared at the fire. William was asleep against her, warm and breathing and mercifully unaware. My husband didn't know, she said. He didn't know how bad the debt was. Or, she stopped. Maybe he did know and didn't tell me because he was hoping to fix it before it came to that. What happened to him? Fever, she said. February. He was gone in 5 days. She said it with the flat precision of a fact she had told herself many times, the way you compress grief into something portable enough to carry without stopping every time you lift it. He was 29 years old. Caleb was quiet. He didn't say he was sorry. She appreciated that more than she expected to. People who said they were sorry seemed to expect something in return for it, some acknowledgement, some performance of gratitude for their sentiment. He simply sat with the fact of it, and didn't make it into something she had to respond to. You've been alone since February, he said. Since February. With a newborn. William was born in March. She looked down at her son's sleeping face. 6 weeks after Thomas died. I delivered him at the church with the minister's wife. She was kind. She did her best. A pause. He came early. He was so small I was afraid to hold him. Like holding something that might break if I moved wrong. But he didn't break. No, she said. He didn't. Something almost like a smile crossed her face and then was gone. He's stubborn. His father was stubborn. Caleb put a piece of wood on the fire. It caught and the light shifted. You're stubborn too, he said. It wasn't a compliment or a criticism, just an observation delivered with the same flat accuracy he used for most things. "Excuse me. Up there on that platform, most people in that situation, they collapse. Or they rage. You held still, and you counted bids, and you did not give them anything to use against you." He looked at her. "That takes stubbornness." She looked back at him. "Or desperation," she said. "Sometimes they look the same from the outside," he said. "Doesn't change what they produce." She didn't know what to do with that. It was the most he'd said at once since Bitter Creek, and it sat differently than she expected, not unwelcome. She slept that night better than she had in weeks, which surprised her. She woke once when William fussed and settled him back and looked up at the stars through the branches and listened to the fire. He'd banked it low and the creek and the horses, and realized that Caleb was not asleep. He was sitting at the edge of the camp with his back to the trees facing the road, watching. She lay back down and told herself to think about that in the morning and was asleep again in minutes. Morning came with cold dew and bird sound, and William awake and demanding with the cheerful aggression of an infant who had eaten the night before and was now prepared to make full use of renewed energy. She took care of him, drank water, ate what was left of the grain block from yesterday. Caleb was already at the horses, already packed, already ready. "How much further?" she asked. "Half day?" he said. "Maybe less." She settled William in her arms and looked at him. He was wearing the same coat, the same hat. He'd slept, she assumed he'd slept, but there was no sign of it in his movement or his face. He operated at the same constant, steady register, like a man whose resting state was readiness. "Caleb." He looked at her. "Thank you," she said. "For yesterday. For—" She stopped because what she needed to say was larger than she had words for, and she wasn't going to attempt it badly. "Just thank you." He held her gaze for a moment, then gave a short nod, the nod of a man who has received the words and put them somewhere internal, where they will sit without demanding anything further. "Let's ride," he said. They rode. The road climbed. The trees changed lower growth, giving way to pine, that stood tall and close-ranked on either side. The air thickened with the smell of resin and cold water from snowmelt streams crossing the path. Evelyn's ears adjusted to elevation. William blinked at the changed light coming through the canopy, interested in his unreliable infant way. She was watching the road ahead when Caleb went very still behind her. Not the stillness of a man at rest, the stillness of a man who has seen something. "What?" she said, keeping her voice low. "Don't look back," he said. "Keep looking forward." She kept looking forward. Her heart moved into a different gear. "2 riders," he said quietly. "About quarter-mile behind us. Same pace we're riding. Have been since the fork. Hollis. Don't know yet. What do we do? We keep riding." His voice was absolutely level. "There's a switchback about a mile ahead where the road narrows. One way in, one way out. If they're following us, they'll have to commit to it. If they're not, they'll take the lower fork. And if they commit, a beat. Then we have a conversation," he said. She did not ask what kind of conversation. She could tell from his voice what kind he meant. She held William tighter against her chest. He was awake, looking up at the sky moving through the branches above. He made a small, interested sound. "Shh," she whispered. "Just look at the sky, baby. Just look at the sky." The horse kept moving. The road climbed. And behind them, steady and unhurried, 2 riders kept their pace. The switchback came, and the 2 riders took it. Caleb felt Evelyn tense the moment she heard the hoofbeats follow them around the bend. She didn't say anything. She pulled William closer and sat straighter in the saddle, and he noted both of those things with the part of his mind that was always noting things, cataloging them, filing them against future need. "Still behind us?" she asked. "Yes." "How far?" "Closing." He kept his voice even. "They sped up when we took the switchback." "That means they want us to know they're following." He paused. She was right. Men who follow without intent to confront stay at distance. Men who close the gap are sending a message. Yes, he said. That's what it means. So this isn't Hollis being cautious, she said. This is Hollis being sure. Or it isn't Hollis at all. She turned her head slightly, not enough to look back, just enough to show she'd registered the distinction. The man in the brown coat. Possibly. He had someone with him. At the auction. Standing to his left. I noticed because they kept exchanging looks during the bidding. Caleb filed that. She had been standing on that platform, apparently looking at a fixed point above the rooftops. And she had still clocked who was standing where and who was communicating with whom. He'd been right about her at the creek. She noticed everything. There's a logging cut about 200 yards ahead, he said. Wide enough to pull off and let them pass if they're not coming for us. If they keep riding when they see us stopped, we know they're not a threat. And if they stop too, then you take the horse into the trees on the left side. You stay low. You don't make any sound regardless of what you hear. She was quiet for exactly 1 second. What are you going to do? Talk to them. Just talk. To start with. He felt her draw a breath and hold it and let it out slowly. Controlled. She was afraid he could feel it in the tension across her shoulders, in the way she was gripping William, but she was managing the fear instead of letting it manage her. That was the difference between people who survived hard things and people who didn't. Not the absence of fear, the management of it. He pulled the horse to the side at the logging cut, and they waited. The two riders came around the bend. They were not Hollis. One was the man in the brown coat from the auction. The other was younger, thick through the shoulders, wearing a deputy's badge that sat slightly crooked on his vest, the kind of badge a man pins in a hurry, or pins without particular pride in the office it represents. The man in the brown coat stopped his horse about 15 feet away. He looked at Caleb. He looked at Evelyn. He looked at the baby. Then he smiled, which was the wrong response to the situation, and he either didn't know that or didn't care. Mr. Morgan, he said, my name is Garrett. I work for certain business interests in the county. You caused those interests some inconvenience this morning. I paid a legal debt, Caleb said, in front of witnesses, with a representative of the magistrate's office present. You did, Garrett agreed pleasantly. Voss is unfortunately thorough about his paperwork, which means we can't contest the payment itself. He tilted his head. What we can contest is the disposition of the woman. Evelyn made a sound. Not a word, just a sharp exhale through her nose. She's not property, Caleb said. The payment discharged the debt. She's a free woman. She is, Garrett said. Absolutely. Free to make her own choices. He looked at Evelyn directly. Ma'am, I represent a party who is prepared to offer you a genuine employment contract. Legitimate wages. Housing for yourself and the child. All quite legal. All quite voluntary. He let the words sit. We simply want to give you the opportunity to consider it without... His eyes moved back to Caleb interference. She's not interested, Caleb said. I'd like to hear that from her. I'm not interested, Evelyn said. Her voice was flat and cold and carried across the 15 feet between them without effort. Garrett looked at her for a moment. The pleasant expression didn't change. The party I represent is quite insistent, Mrs. Harper. They have a significant interest in the Harper land claim. Your husband filed a territorial land claim before his death, a claim that with you as surviving widow remains active. A claim that certain parties would very much like to see resolved. The land claim. Caleb heard Evelyn's breath change. She hadn't known, or she had known and hadn't thought it would matter. Either way, this was no longer about debt or labor or an auction in Bitter Creek. This was about land, which meant it had been about land from the beginning, and everything else had been the method. Thomas filed that claim 8 months ago, Evelyn said. Her voice had changed too. The cold was still there, but underneath it was something new, the sound of a woman recalculating everything she thought she understood about the last year of her life. He never told me it was valuable. I suspect he didn't know the full extent of it. Garrett said with a sympathy that was entirely manufactured. The survey data has only recently become available. There's a significant water source on the eastern section. In this territory, Mrs. Harper water is worth considerably more than gold. And if she contests the claim, Caleb said. Garrett's pleasant expression finally dropped a degree. Not gone, just cooled. That would be a long, expensive legal process. For a woman with no resources, no legal representation, and no... He glanced at William. Stability. We're offering a fair settlement, a clean resolution. You're offering her a way to sign away something valuable while she's too exhausted and frightened to know what she's signing, Caleb said. Garrett looked at him for a long moment. The deputy beside him shifted in his saddle. Mr. Morgan, Garrett said, you've done something admirable today. You helped a woman in distress. That speaks well of you. But this is a legal and financial matter that is significantly above the concerns of a mountain trapper, and I would strongly encourage you to... Ride on, Caleb said. A pause. I beg your pardon. I said ride on. His voice hadn't risen. It hadn't hardened in any obvious way. It was exactly the same voice he'd been using all day, and something about that the complete absence of performance was more effective than volume would have been. You've delivered your message. She's heard it. She's declined. This conversation is done. The deputy's hand moved toward his belt. Caleb watched it. He didn't move. Didn't reach for anything. Just watched the deputy's hand with the same calm, complete attention he'd used for everything else. And something in that attention, in the absolute stillness of a large man who is not afraid and is not pretending not to be afraid, but simply and genuinely is not made. The deputy's hand stopped where it was. Garrett looked at his deputy, looked at Caleb, did the math. We'll be in touch, Mrs. Harper, he said. He touched his hat a grotesque parody of courtesy and turned his horse. The deputy followed. They rode back down the switchback and were gone. Evelyn sat absolutely still for a moment after the sound of hoofbeats faded. Then she said quietly, and with considerable feeling, a word that Caleb suspected she didn't use often. He said nothing. The land, she said. This was about the land the entire time. Most likely. Thomas filed that claim and someone found out about the water source and then Thomas died and they... She stopped. Thomas died in February, in 5 days, from a fever. She said it again and this time it sounded different. This time it sounded like a question she hadn't known to ask before. Caleb was quiet. You think someone... She couldn't finish it. I don't know, he said honestly. February fevers kill healthy men. It happens. He paused. But I'd want to know who knew about that land claim before I decided it was only a fever. Evelyn pressed her lips together. William had fallen asleep again during the confrontation. Infants blessedly are indifferent to adult crises, and she looked down at him now with an expression that had moved past fear into something colder and more purposeful. I need a lawyer, she said. Yes, I need someone who knows territorial land law and isn't in the pocket of whoever Garrett works for. Yes. Do you know anyone like that? He thought for a moment. There's a man in Crestfall, name of Aldous Birch. He's a territorial commissioner's representative, handles land disputes. He's honest, which is rarer than it should be, but he is. I've dealt with him before. How far is Crestfall? From the cabin 2 days' ride south. She nodded. Processing. She was doing it fast, he noticed, taking in new information and restructuring her understanding of her situation without the luxury of time or the comfort of denial. She didn't say, this can't be happening, or I don't understand any of this. She said, I need a lawyer, and started building next steps. He found that remarkable and didn't say so. Let's get to the cabin, she said. Then we talked to Birch. They rode. The rest of the climb was silent and steep, and the horse worked hard at it. The air thinned slightly, and the temperature dropped in the way high country temperature drops, not dramatically, but insistently, the way it reminds you that up here, the rules are different. Evelyn pulled May's wool blanket from the bag and wrapped it around William without being asked, tucking it efficiently, and then sat with her spine straight and her eyes on the road ahead. She was thinking hard. He could feel it. "There's something else," she said about an hour from the top. "Tell me." "Garrett knew your name. He called you Mr. Morgan immediately. He didn't ask, which means he knew who you were before he rode up behind us." Caleb had noticed that. He'd been waiting to see if she had. "Yes. So, someone in Bitter Creek told him who had made the payment, and he or whoever he works for had time to look you up or already knew you before riding out after us." She paused. "Who knows you in Bitter Creek well enough to identify you to someone like Garrett?" "Josiah Pratt, May Dunbar, a few others." "Would any of them?" "May know." He said it without hesitation. "Josiah." A pause. "Josiah is not a bad man, but he's a man with a store and a mortgage and 3 children, and men in that position make compromises. So Josiah may have told them. Josiah may have been asked a direct question by a man with a deputy's badge and answered it," Caleb said. "That's different from informing, but the result's the same." Well, she thought about that. "Garrett said certain business interests. Not Hollis. Hollis is a land grabber with ready money. But what Garrett described, the survey data, the water rights, the legal framework, that's not Hollis. That's someone with resources and lawyers and a long game." "Agreed. Someone who had a plan before Thomas was dead." He said nothing. She was thinking out loud, and she was doing it well, and he wasn't going to interrupt that with unnecessary words. "Which means," she said, and her voice was quiet now, very quiet, "that the auction wasn't opportunism. It was the second step of something that started before February." The horse crested the last rise and the cabin came into view. It was a solid, low-built structure, not large, but made to last chinked tight against mountain winters, with a wood pile that ran the full length of one wall and a water barrel fed by a pipe from the creek above. The door was heavy wood, hung on iron hinges. There were 2 windows, both shuttered. Evelyn looked at it. "You built this yourself," she said. "Yes." "It's well made." "I had time," he said. He helped her down, and she stood on solid ground and stretched her back with the particular care of a woman who has been holding a baby in a moving saddle for hours and is now renegotiating with her own spine. William woke up when the motion stopped and looked around with the disoriented indignation of someone interrupted mid-sleep. "I know," Evelyn told him. "I know. We're here." Caleb opened the cabin, and she went inside. He heard her stop just past the threshold, doing the same quick assessment she did everywhere, cataloging space resource risk. He was beginning to understand that this was not caution born of fear. It was a habit of competence. She was a woman who had been managing a difficult situation alone for 5 months, and she had learned to read rooms the way he read terrain. He brought the bags in and lit the stove. "There's a sleeping area in the back," he said. "Take it. I'll sleep near the fire." "I'm not going to take your bed." "You're nursing an infant who wakes through the night," he said. "You take the bed. It's not a discussion." She looked at him. Something in her expression flickered not quite amusement, but in the territory. "You do that a lot," she said. "Do what?" "End discussions before they start. It saves time. It's also somewhat high-handed. Would you prefer to debate sleeping arrangements right now? Because I am entirely willing." "No," she said. "Fine, thank you." She took William to the back, and he could hear her settling the quiet sounds of a mother arranging a safe sleep space with the precise economy of someone who has done it in improvised locations before. He put water on for the stove, checked the provisions, ran a quick inventory of what needed replenishing before winter, which was still months away, but was never as far away up here as people from lower elevation assumed. He was halfway through the inventory when she came back. William was asleep. She had washed her face at the basin he kept filled from the upper pipe, and her hair was pulled back simply, and she looked less like a woman who had been auctioned that morning and more like herself. Whatever herself actually was when circumstances weren't grinding it flat. She sat at the table. He put coffee in front of her. She accepted it without ceremony. "Tell me about Aldous Birch," she said. Territorial Commissioner's Representative. He's been in Crestfall about 4 years. Before that, he practiced law in Denver. He left Denver. Caleb paused, considering how to condense it. There was a case, a family being defrauded of a mining claim by a larger interest. The large interest had better lawyers and better money, and Birch knew his client was going to lose legally speaking. So he went around the legal avenue. He found a survey error in the original claim filing that voided the larger interest's purchase entirely. Technically not fraud. Technically just reading paperwork very carefully. Evelyn looked at him over the coffee cup. The powerful interest came after him. He relocated to Crestfall shortly afterward. And you trust him? I trust him on land law. I trust him on honesty. He paused. I trust his judgment in situations that are complicated. Like this one. Yes. She set down the cup. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked up at him with the direct measuring look he'd been getting since the creek. The look she used when she was about to say something she'd been working up to. Why do you live alone up here? She said. He hadn't expected that question, which was unusual. Because I prefer it, he said. That's not really an answer either. It's honest. People who prefer solitude, she said carefully, usually prefer it because something made company difficult. I'm not... She stopped. I'm not trying to pry. I'm trying to understand who I'm depending on. Because I am depending on you, Caleb, whether I like that or not, and I need to know if there are things I should know. He sat across from her. The fire snapped in the stove. Outside, the evening wind was moving through the upper pine. He thought about how to answer her. He gave her an honest answer which was shorter than most people expected. I had a partner, he said. 7 years ago. We ran a high-country trap line together. He was my closest friend. He was killed in a claim dispute. Man who killed him was never charged. The law in that county belonged to the same men who wanted the claim. He stopped. After that, I didn't see much purpose in being around people who pretended the law meant something it didn't mean. Evelyn was very still. I'm sorry, she said. And she said it the same way he had not said it to her at the fire, without expectation of return, without making it something she needed a response to. It was 7 years ago, he said. 7 years ago is still real. He looked at her. She looked back. The fire snapped again. Yes, he said. It is. She nodded once. She picked up her coffee, and then he would think about this moment later, would come back to it, she said. I think they may have killed Thomas. She said it quietly, without drama. The way someone says something, they have been afraid to think clearly, and have now thought clearly enough to say out loud. I think, she continued, that someone knew about the water survey before Thomas did, and I think they couldn't get the claim from him directly. He would have known what it was worth eventually. So I think they made sure he wouldn't have the chance to find out. She looked at her hands. I have no proof. I have nothing except the timing and the money Garrett is willing to spend, and the way he looked at me this afternoon, not like I was a woman he wanted to help, like I was an obstacle he needed to move. Caleb looked at her for a long time. If that's true, he said finally, then Birch is not enough. I know. There would need to be a federal component, a circuit court complaint at minimum. Land fraud with potential criminal implications would go above the magistrate, she said, above whoever owns Garrett, above whatever arrangement exists in this county. She met his eyes. Is that possible? If we have the right evidence, he said. Yes, then we need to find the evidence. He looked at her, at this woman who had been barefoot on a platform that morning, and was now in his cabin at his table, laying out a legal strategy against a land fraud conspiracy that may have killed her husband. A woman who had cried everything she had, and was now using what was left of herself to fight. All right, he said. All right. We find the evidence. He stood. But not tonight. Tonight you sleep. Both of you. He looked at her. You're no good to him. He nodded toward the back room, or to this if you fall apart from exhaustion. She looked like she might argue, Then she looked like a woman who has just registered how tired she actually is and has decided that arguing takes energy she doesn't have. "Fine," she said, "but first thing in the morning." "First thing," he agreed. She stood and she moved toward the back room, and then she stopped in the doorway and turned back, and he was already turning away toward the fire. "Caleb." He looked at her. "You said you stopped being around people who pretended the law meant something it didn't." She held his gaze. "Today, what you did today, that was you believing it means something, or wanting it to, or deciding to act like it does, even when you know it might not." She paused. "I think that's harder than the alternative, and I think you don't give yourself credit for it." He had no answer for that. She went to bed. He sat by the fire for a long time, listening to the mountains settle around the cabin, and thought about what she'd said, and thought about the man in the brown coat, and thought about Thomas Harper dying of a fever in February, and thought about water rights and survey data, and the kind of men who build legal frameworks around crimes to make the crimes invisible. Then he put more wood on the fire and checked the bar on the door and sat with his back to the wall, where he could see both the door and the window. He did not sleep. Outside the mountain, dark pressed down thick and total, and somewhere down the road below them, Garrett and his deputy were riding back to whoever gave them orders. And the next move was being decided by people who had more resources and more time, and thought they had more power than one mountain man and a widow with a baby, and the address of an honest lawyer 2 days' ride south. They thought wrong, but they didn't know that yet. He was gone before she woke up. Evelyn came out of the back room with William against her shoulder and found the cabin empty and the fire banked low and a plate of food on the table, dried meat, hard biscuit, a small tin of something preserved that she didn't recognize but ate without questioning, because she had learned in 5 months of managing alone that pride about food was a luxury she couldn't afford. There was no note. She hadn't expected one. She fed. William ate her own breakfast, standing up, and spent the first hour learning the cabin. Not snooping cataloging. The same habit she'd explained to herself as competence. Where the water was, where the food stores were, what tools were available, how the door latched, and whether the shutters on the windows could be secured from inside. They could. She noted that. She noted. She was heating water on the stove when she heard his boots on the step outside and the specific, unhurried weight of his knock. One knock, a pause, then the door opening because he'd learned already that she startled easily in enclosed spaces and was giving her the half-second to prepare. She noticed that too. "You were up early," she said. "I rode the perimeter." He set a brace of rabbits on the hook by the door and pulled his coat off. "Garrett and his deputy camped about 2 miles south last night. They're gone this morning, rode back down toward the valley." Gone or retreating? Retreating to report. He sat at the table. "Which means whoever they report to will make a decision. We have maybe 2 days before that decision produces action." She set a cup of coffee in front of him and sat across. "Then we need to move today." "We ride to Crestfall this afternoon. I want to reach Birch before anyone down in the valley has time to reach him first and—" He paused. "Complicate things." "Can they do that? Influence a territorial commissioner's representative?" "They can try." He wrapped both hands around the cup. "Birch has held against pressure before, but I want him hearing our version first." William made a sound from the blanket she'd arranged on the floor near the stove. Not distress, just announcement. The sound of an infant who has finished sleeping and is now available for commerce with the world. Evelyn glanced at him, and he settled, and she looked back at Caleb. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," she said, "about needing federal involvement if it was more than a fever. And I think I have something." She stood and went to her canvas bag and came back with a folded paper worn at the creases, the kind of worn that comes from being handled many times and put away carefully each time. She set it on the table. "Thomas sent me this, 3 weeks before he died. He was in Bitter Creek filing some paperwork at the land office, and he wrote to me from there. I was at the house. We had a small place east of town. He said, She opened it carefully. He said he'd met a man at the land office who was asking questions about our claim, asking what the eastern boundary was, asking about the creek that ran through it. Thomas wrote it down because it seemed strange. The man wasn't from the county. He said he was a surveyor, but Thomas didn't believe it. Caleb looked at the letter. Did he describe him? Medium height, dark coat? Very precise questions. Thomas wrote that the man knew exactly what to ask, which meant he already knew the answers and was checking them against something. Caleb was still for a moment. "Garrett," he said. "That's what I think." Her voice was steady. "Which means Garrett was in Bitter Creek 3 weeks before Thomas died assessing the claim. And 6 weeks after Thomas died, he showed up at an auction to acquire the widow of the man whose claim he'd been assessing." She folded the letter back along its creases. "That is not coincidence." "No," Caleb said. "It is not. It's also not proof of murder," she said, because she was a woman who didn't mistake what she had for what she wished she had. "It's proof of intent and prior knowledge and probably fraud. But murder?" She stopped. "I don't know if we can prove murder." "We don't have to prove it," Caleb said. "We have to raise enough question to trigger a federal inquiry. A territorial commissioner's investigation into land fraud connected to a suspicious death that goes above every arrangement in this county. Birch can file that complaint." She looked at him. "You've thought about this before." "I thought about it when you said Thomas died in 5 days, and the timeline matched Garrett's visit exactly." She absorbed that, the weight of it. "You were calculating this last night." "Some of it. While I was sleeping." "You needed to sleep." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't entirely categorize, something that was not quite gratitude and not quite something else, and sat in the space between them for a second, before she pulled her eyes back to the letter. "We'll take this to Birch," she said. "Yes, and anything else you have, any document Thomas left, any record of the claim filing, any communication from the land office." "I have the claim receipt," she said. "It was in my bag when the creditors took the house. They didn't think it was worth anything." She paused with something that was almost bitter satisfaction. Apparently they were wrong. They rode for Crestfall within the hour. The trail south was different from the road they'd climbed, narrower, more technical, the kind of path that required attention and rewarded familiarity. Caleb knew it the way he knew the perimeter of the cabin, not by thinking about it, but by a kind of physical memory that operated below thought. He guided the horse through it, and Evelyn rode with William strapped against her chest in a sling she'd improvised from May's wool blanket. Her hands free, her weight balanced with the ease of someone who had found her riding legs. She had. Sometime in the last day and a half, without announcement, she had stopped being a woman enduring a horse and become a woman riding one. He noticed, said nothing. An hour into the trail, she said, "Tell me about Birch, personally, not the Denver story. What's he like?" "Methodical," Caleb said. "Quiet. He looks like the kind of man you'd overlook in a room, which is something he uses deliberately. He asks more questions than he answers, and he doesn't telegraph what he's thinking." He paused. "He has a scar on his left hand from where the man in the Denver mining case had him roughed up before Birch filed his paperwork. He didn't file the paperwork any later than he'd planned." "He held," she said. "He held." She nodded, turning this over. "Is he going to look at me and see a widow with a baby and assume I can't manage what's happening?" "No." "You sound certain." "Birch has a sister who raised 4 children alone after her husband died in the war," Caleb said. "He doesn't make assumptions about what women can manage." She was quiet a moment. Then, "You know a lot about him for someone who prefers solitude." "I said I preferred solitude, not that I had no use for certain people." She made a sound, not quite a laugh, but its neighbor. They were 2 hours from Crestfall when the trail opened briefly onto a ridge, and Caleb pulled the horse up without warning. Evelyn grabbed the horn. "What?" "Rider," he said. "Coming up from the south. Fast." She felt him shift behind her, not reaching for anything yet, but redistributing his weight the way he did when he was considering options. She looked south along the trail. She could see the rider now coming hard too fast for this terrain, the kind of speed that means urgency rather than threat. Then the rider's coat resolved out of the distance, and Evelyn said, "That's a woman." It was. A woman of perhaps 40 riding alone, pushing her horse with the confidence of someone who knew this trail and was in a hurry she considered worth the risk. She pulled up about 30 feet away and looked at Caleb with recognition. "Morgan," she said, catching her breath, "I was coming to find you." "Ruth Waller," Caleb said with the tone of a man encountering something unexpected but not entirely surprising. "Why?" Ruth Waller looked at Evelyn. Her expression did a series of rapid calculations. "You're the Harper widow." "Yes," Evelyn said. "Then this concerns you directly." She looked back at Caleb. "Birch is gone." A beat. "What do you mean gone?" Caleb said. "I mean gone. As of yesterday morning. His office was locked, which isn't unusual, but he didn't come to the alderman's meeting in the afternoon, which is extremely unusual, and when the deputy went to his house, a different deputy, not the one running errands for Garrett, he wasn't there. His papers are there. His horse is there." She met Caleb's eyes. "Aldous Birch does not go anywhere without his horse." Evelyn felt something cold move through her that was not the mountain air. "Someone moved him," Caleb said. It was not a question. "Someone moved him before your business could reach him," Ruth said. "I heard from May Dunbar this morning she sent her grandson on horseback that you were heading for Crestfall. I came to intercept you before you rode into town and made your situation visible to whoever is watching for you." "Who is Ruth Waller?" Evelyn asked Caleb quietly. "The wife of the district alderman," he said, "and the most reliably informed person in this part of the territory." "Former wife," Ruth said without heat. "He died last spring, but the information network survived him." She looked at Evelyn directly. "Mrs. Harper, my late husband, knew about the water survey on your land. He told me 3 months ago that a man from Denver, a man representing a land development consortium, had come through Crestfall, asking questions about uncontested claims in the valley. Questions that got very specific very fast about the Harper land." "Denver," Evelyn said. "This goes all the way to Denver." "The consortium operates out of Denver," Ruth said. "They've done this before. 3 times in the last 2 years that I know of. They identify valuable claims held by people with insufficient legal resources to defend them, isolated homesteaders, recent immigrants who don't know the statutes, widows." Her eyes went briefly to William. "They create a legal mechanism to dissolve the claim or force a sale at undervalue, and they move on. And the people who stand in their way," Evelyn said. "What happens to them?" Ruth looked at her steadily. "Thomas Harper is not the first person connected to a disputed claim to die of a sudden illness," she said. "And Aldous Birch is not the first lawyer in this territory to disappear when a complicated case was about to be filed." The mountain was very quiet. William shifted in the sling and made a small sound, and Evelyn put her hand against his back, automatically pressing him close. "I need a name," Caleb said. "The consortium. The man from Denver." Ruth reached into her coat and produced a folded paper. She held it out. "My husband kept records. He was documenting what he suspected, but hadn't confirmed before he died. It's not proof, it's correspondence, dates, names of people who received visits from consortium representatives. But it's a pattern." She paused. "The man who runs the consortium is named Harlan Cross. He is connected to 3 territorial judges, a sitting congressman, and the largest land bank in Colorado." Evelyn took the paper from Ruth's hand. She unfolded it and looked at the names. One of them made her stop. "Magistrate Greer," she said. "Voss's magistrate. The one who authorized the auction." "Greer has been receiving payment from the consortium for 4 years," Ruth said. "My husband found the bank records. Copies, not originals, but—" "It's enough to open an inquiry," Caleb said. He looked at Ruth. "Who do we take this to if the county law is compromised and Birch is gone?" "Federal Land Office," Ruth said. "There's a federal land agent in Pueblo. Name of Calloway. He is not in anyone's pocket because he came in from Washington specifically to audit territorial land transfers. He's been here 8 months, and Harlan Cross's people haven't had time to reach him yet." She looked at Caleb with urgency. But they will try. This window won't last. How long to Pueblo? Evelyn asked. 3 days hard ride, Caleb said. Then we ride today, she said. He looked at her, at the baby, at the worn shoes and the borrowed blanket, and the 3 days of difficult terrain between here and a federal agent who represented the first clean legal authority within reach. It's 3 days, Evelyn. I heard you. She met his eyes. I also heard that Birch is missing and Greer is bought, and Harlan Cross has 3 judges in his pocket and has done this before and will do it again after us if we don't stop it. She held his gaze. I am not going back to that cabin and waiting for Garrett to come back with more men and a legal filing that signs away what Thomas died for. I am going to Pueblo. Ruth looked at Caleb. Her expression said very clearly that woman has made up her mind. He knew it too. He'd known it for the last 15 seconds. Ruth, he said, can you ride with us as far as the lower fork? I want an extra pair of eyes on the southern trail. I can ride as far as Millhaven, Ruth said. I have a cousin there. After that, you're on your own, but I'll send word ahead to a woman named Clara Briggs who keeps the way station south of the pass. She can be trusted. Good. He looked at Evelyn. We ride. The 3 of them pushed south. Ruth setting the pace because she knew this stretch of country better than anyone, moving through terrain that was demanding enough to require attention and leaving no space for the fear that was Evelyn knew, sitting just behind her sternum, waiting for a quieter moment to be felt. She didn't give it the moment. Ruth rode beside her when the trail widened enough. She looked at William in the sling, then at Evelyn's face. How old? She asked. 4 months. He's good on horseback. He doesn't know he has a choice, Evelyn said. Ruth made a sound that was a real laugh, short and real. That's the only reason any of us manage anything. We don't know we have a choice. She paused. Your husband, did he know what he had in that land claim? I think he was beginning to figure it out. I think that's why he's dead. Ruth rode in silence for a moment. I'm sorry about Thomas. I didn't know him well, but I knew of him. He filed that claim because he wanted to build something permanent. He told the land office clerk that he had a son coming, and he wanted the boy to have ground that was his. She glanced at William. He knew before you did, apparently. Evelyn looked at her son. He guessed, she said softly. He guessed right. They reached Millhaven as the afternoon light was going flat and gold, the kind of light that makes everything look resolved even when nothing is. Ruth pulled up at the edge of the small settlement and turned her horse. Clara Briggs at the way station, she said. Tell her I sent you. She'll give you shelter and supplies, and she won't ask questions she doesn't need answered. She looked at Caleb. Morgan, whatever you do in Pueblo, do it fast. Cross's people are going to figure out where you're headed. I know. They have a 3-day head start in resources and money and connections. I know that too. She looked at him for a moment. You paid $65 in gold this morning, for a woman you'd never met. Yesterday morning, he said. Does it feel like yesterday? He glanced at Evelyn. No, he said. It doesn't. Ruth touched her hat brim, a gesture that was entirely her own, without the performative courtesy Garrett had used, and rode into Millhaven without looking back. They kept riding south. The trail narrowed again as the light dropped. William slept in the sling with the commitment of an infant who has decided that motion is his natural habitat. Evelyn rode and didn't speak, and Caleb rode behind her and watched the trail and the hillsides and the long angles of shadow that the sinking sun threw across the terrain. After a long silence, she said, Thomas wanted him to have land. I know. Ruth said, I know what Ruth said. I mean, she stopped. Reorganized. He was a quiet man, Thomas. Not like you, not controlled quiet, just gentle quiet. He didn't make big pronouncements. He showed things by doing them. And filing that claim was him saying, this child is going to have something real, something that can't be taken. Her voice was steady, but only just. And then it was used to take him. Caleb said nothing. He let the weight of that sit without trying to resolve it. "I am going to get that land back," she said. "I am going to do it legally and completely, and in a way that makes it impossible for Harlan Cross or anyone connected to him to touch it again. And I am going to bring it to William when he's old enough to understand it and tell him his father built it for him." She paused. "That is not a plan. That is a fact I have decided." "All right," Caleb said. "You believe me?" "Yes." "Why?" He thought about it. The horse moved steady beneath them. The last light moved across the hillside and went. "Because 3 days ago you were barefoot on an auction platform holding your son, and you did not break," he said. "A woman who doesn't break there doesn't break anywhere." She didn't answer. The dark came down around them, and they rode by feel and familiarity, and the small sounds of the mountains settling into night. An hour later, a light appeared ahead. The way station. And beside the door, holding a lantern, was a woman in a heavy coat who saw them coming and did not move inside, but waited the posture of someone who has been notified and is prepared and is not afraid of what the dark might bring up the road. Clara Briggs. Ruth's message had arrived ahead of them. Evelyn felt something in her chest ease just slightly, just enough at the sight of that lantern held steady in an unknown woman's hand. Evidence that the network of people who helped each other against the men who took things existed and was functioning and had room in it for a widow on horseback with a baby and a mountain man and a leather bag of documents that might, if they were careful and fast and fortunate, be enough to bring down Harlan Cross. Might. If. She kept riding. She had stopped waiting for certainty. Certainty was a luxury that belonged to people who had more time than she did. What she had was forward, and she used it. Clara Briggs fed them without asking questions exactly as Ruth had promised. She was a compact, deliberate woman who moved through her way station with the efficiency of someone who has been providing shelter to people in difficult situations long enough to know that what they need first is not conversation, but warmth and food and a door that closes. She put a bowl of stew in front of Evelyn and a larger one in front of Caleb and heated water for William's supplemental milk without being asked. And when Evelyn tried to explain the situation, Clara held up one hand. "Ruth sent word," she said. "I know enough. Eat." Evelyn ate. Caleb ate. William ate. And for 30 minutes, the only sounds in the way station were the stove and the wind outside and the specific comfortable quiet of a space run by a woman who understands that silence is sometimes the most generous thing you can offer. After dinner, Clara sat across from them and folded her hands on the table. "Callaway is in Pueblo," she said. "I had my husband ride in last week for supplies and he confirmed it. Federal land agent been there 8 months making himself unpopular with the right people." She looked at Caleb. "You know what he looks like?" "No." "Tall, red beard going gray. Wears a federal seal on his coat that he clearly polishes regularly, which tells you something about how he feels about what he represents." She looked at Evelyn. "He's the kind of man who polishes his badge because he believes in it, not because he wants to impress anyone." "That's the kind we need," Evelyn said. "That's the kind you have," Clara said. "But you need to reach him before Cross's people do. I got word this afternoon, don't ask me how I have my methods, that a rider left Bitter Creek heading south around midday. Fast rider. Light on baggage." Caleb set down his fork. "A messenger. To Cross in Denver, or to Cross's man in Pueblo." Clara met his eyes. "You have maybe a day and a half lead, maybe less." Evelyn looked at Caleb. He looked at her. The calculation was fast and mutual, and didn't require words. "We leave before first light," he said. Clara nodded like this was what she expected. "I'll have horses ready. Yours is tired. I've got a fresh animal that'll make the southern pass better than what you're riding." She stood. "Sleep, both of you. 3 hours is better than none." Evelyn lay down on the cot Clara provided and closed her eyes and told herself she would not sleep because there was too much to think about and was unconscious in 4 minutes. She woke to Caleb's hand on her shoulder, not gripping, just present, the way he did most things, with the minimum force necessary, and no drama attached. "Time," he said. She was on her feet, before she was fully awake, William already stirring in the way of infants who sense the movement of the people they depend on. She fed him, changed him, strapped him back into the sling, with hands that moved by now from pure muscle memory, and was at the door with her bag, before Caleb had finished checking the saddle on the new horse. Clara stood in the doorway with a lantern and a wrapped package of food. "Calloway's office is on the main street," she said. "East side, federal seal on the door. Go in the front, not the back. Going in the back makes you look like you're hiding, and you're not hiding." She pressed the food into Evelyn's hands and looked at her directly. "You have every right to be there. Walk in like you know it." "Thank you," Evelyn said. Clara made a dismissive motion. "Ruth Waller is my oldest friend. When she sends someone to my door, they are someone worth helping." She looked at William. "His father's land," she said quietly. "Get it back." They rode into the dark. The southern pass was harder in the dark, but the new horse was what Clara had promised, steady and strong and responsive in the way of a well-trained animal that has made this trail before. Caleb set the pace, and it was faster than he would have chosen with an infant, and a woman who'd ridden more miles in the last 3 days than she had likely ridden in the previous 3 years. But Evelyn matched it without complaint, without request for adjustment, and he stopped calibrating for her limitations after the first hour, because it was increasingly clear she didn't have the ones he'd expected. Dawn found them on the far side of the pass, moving through lower terrain. The air was warmer. The mountains were behind them. Pueblo was a day ahead. "Tell me what we say to Calloway," Evelyn said, as full light came up. "Exactly. In order." "The land claim first," Caleb said. "Show him the receipt. Establish that the claim is valid and active, and that you are the legal heir. That's the foundation everything else builds on." Then Thomas's letter. Then the letter, which establishes that Garrett was on site assessing the claim 3 weeks before Thomas died, which establishes prior knowledge and interest. Then Ruth's papers, which establish the pattern, the consortium's methods, Greer's payments, the other claims they've taken. That moves it from a single fraud case to a criminal conspiracy. He paused. "Calloway is a federal agent. Federal agents respond to patterns. 1 case is a complaint. 3 cases with the same method and the same names is a federal investigation." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, organizing it. He could see her doing it, running the logic testing for gaps, finding the weak points. "Birch," she said. "His disappearance. Do we raise it?" "Yes. A licensed legal representative disappearing the day before a fraud complaint was to be filed is not a coincidence any federal agent can ignore." "They could say he left voluntarily." "They could. Calloway will want to verify it. Verification means investigation. Investigation means Cross's operation goes under a microscope they have not been under before." He looked at her. "We don't need to prove everything today. We need to give Calloway enough to open the door. Once a federal inquiry begins, Cross can't close it from the outside. He can only try to manage it, and managing it requires more people who know about it, and more people who know about it means more chances for the whole thing to fall apart. You've thought about legal strategy for a man who lives alone in the mountains." "I've thought about what I would have done differently 7 years ago," he said. "If I'd had the right documents and the right authority, and I'd moved fast enough." She understood what he meant. He didn't say his partner's name, and she didn't ask him to. The weight of it traveled between them without needing to be named. "We're going to move fast enough," she said. "Yes," he said. "We are." They reached Pueblo in the late afternoon of the 3rd day. The town was larger than Bitter Creek, a genuine commerce center with a telegraph office and a hotel, and a federal building on the main street that announced itself with a formality that Bitter Creek's land office had only pretended to. Caleb had been right about Calloway's door. There was a federal seal on it, brass well-maintained, visible from across the street. Evelyn straightened in the saddle when she saw it. "How do I look?" she said. He assessed her honestly. 3 days of hard riding, travel-worn clothes, A baby in a sling made from a borrowed blanket. Exhaustion that had been managed but not resolved. Like a woman who rode 3 days to be here, he said, which is exactly what you are. Walk in like you know it. She repeated Clara's words back to herself and dismounted and walked in the front door. Calloway was at his desk. He was tall, red-bearded, going gray exactly as described, and he was reading a document with the focused attention of a man who reads carefully and annotates as he goes. He looked up when the door opened. He looked at Evelyn. He looked at the baby. He looked at Caleb, who came in behind her. He looked back at Evelyn. "Ma'am," he said. "Can I help you?" "Can I?" "My name is Evelyn Harper," she said. "My husband Thomas Harper filed a territorial land claim 18 months ago on a parcel in the Bitter Creek Valley. He died in February. I have reason to believe he was murdered for that claim. That the claim is currently being fraudulently contested by a Denver consortium operating under a man named Harlan Cross, that the magistrate who authorized my illegal auction last week is in Cross's direct pay, and that the territorial commissioner's representative, who was prepared to file a fraud complaint on my behalf, has disappeared." She set her bag on his desk, opened it, and placed the claim receipt, Thomas's letter, and Ruth's papers in a precise row in front of him. "I have documentation supporting each of those statements. I'd like you to read it." Calloway looked at the documents, looked at her, looked at Caleb, looked back at her. "You were auctioned," he said. It was not a question. He'd read the claim receipt date and done the math. "Last week," she said. "In Bitter Creek. Under Territorial Debt Statute 41, which Magistrate Greer, who is on Cross's payroll, used to liquidate the debt my husband left, without informing me of my legal right to contest it." Calloway picked up Thomas's letter. He read it, set it down, picked up Ruth's papers, read those more slowly, which Evelyn correctly interpreted as significance rather than indifference. When he finished, he set the papers down and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on an official's face in 18 months of dealing with officials. It was the expression of a man taking something seriously. "Sit down, Mrs. Harper," he said. She sat. Caleb stood near the door because that's where he stood in rooms able to see both the desk and the entrance back to no one. Calloway folded his hands. "Aldous Birch," he said. "You mentioned him. He disappeared the day before he was to file on my behalf." "I know Birch," Calloway said. "I have corresponded with him on 2 previous land disputes in this territory. He is thorough, and he is not a man who abandons a case." He looked at the papers again. Harlan Cross. He said the name with the deliberate neutrality of someone who knows the name and has been waiting for the right context to use that knowledge. "His consortium has come up before. Nothing actionable. Circumstantial connection to 2 disputed claims in the Southern Territory. Nothing that rose to the level of federal inquiry." He tapped Ruth's papers. "This changes the calculus." "Then you'll investigate," Evelyn said. "I will open a federal inquiry, yes." He met her eyes. "But Mrs. Harper, I need to tell you something directly. Harlan Cross is connected to powerful men. Federal inquiry or not, he will have resources deployed against this within hours of knowing it's been filed. He may already have people in Pueblo." "He has a rider who left Bitter Creek ahead of us," Caleb said from the door. "Roughly a day and a half lead." Calloway looked at him fully for the first time. "And you are Caleb Morgan. I paid the debt that discharged the auction. I've been with Mrs. Harper since Bitter Creek." "Why?" It was a direct question, and it deserved a direct answer. And the honest answer was complicated, and Caleb knew it, and Calloway waited for it. "Because what they did to her was wrong," Caleb said, "and I had the means to start correcting it." Calloway studied him for a moment, with the assessment of a man who makes his living reading people and their motivations. Then he looked back at Evelyn. "The rider who came ahead of you," he said. "If he went to Cross's representative here." He stopped, stood, moved to the window and looked out. His posture changed. "There's a man named Aldridge who operates as Cross's legal contact in Pueblo. He has an office 2 blocks north." He turned from the window. If Aldridge files a preemptive motion with the county clerk before I can open the federal file, he can temporarily cloud the claim and slow the inquiry by weeks. He looked at his watch. The county clerk's office closes in 40 minutes. Evelyn was on her feet before he finished speaking. Then we need to file first. I need 2 things, Calloway said, already moving to his filing cabinet. Your signature on a federal inquiry request, which takes 3 minutes, and the original claim receipt, which I'll need to hold as evidence. He looked at her. Are you prepared to leave it with me? She looked at the receipt. The paper Thomas had held. The paper the creditors hadn't thought was worth taking. The paper that had been in her bag through the auction, and the road, and 3 days of hard riding. Yes, she said. Calloway moved fast for a man who appeared unhurried. He produced the correct form filled in the relevant fields with the speed of someone who knows his own paperwork and turned it to face her with a pen. She read it before she signed it. He waited without impatience. Then she signed. Go directly to the hotel on this street, Calloway said, already filing the form. The Meridian. Tell them Calloway sent you. Don't go back out tonight. Whatever you hear, whatever anyone tells you about urgency or opportunity, stay inside and let me work. What are you going to do? Evelyn asked. I'm going to file this federal inquiry request before that clerk's office closes, which I can do, because I have standing and the clerk knows my face. He picked up his coat. And then I'm going to send a telegram to Denver. To who? He looked at her. To the federal judge who has been looking for grounds to investigate Harlan Cross for 2 years, he said. And who, when he sees these documents, is going to find them? The thing that moved through Evelyn then was not relief. It was too early for relief. But it was the feeling of a door opening, a real door, a federal door, with a brass seal on it, and the particular specific sensation of being on the right side of it for the first time in 8 months. Thank you, she said. Thank me when it's done, Calloway said, and he went out the front door at a pace that was almost a run. The Meridian Hotel gave them 2 rooms on the 2nd floor. Caleb took the one closer to the stairs. He didn't explain this, and Evelyn didn't ask. She understood his logic the same way she'd understood the fire placement at camp. He was thinking about approaches and exits, and she had stopped finding this alarming, and started finding it something else, something she didn't have a clean word for yet. She put William down and sat on the edge of the bed, and let herself feel for about 3 minutes. Everything she had been not feeling for 3 days. The fear, the grief that kept trying to surface through the action and getting pushed back down. The specific sorrow of riding toward justice for a man who should have been the one riding. 3 minutes. Then she put it back. She heard Caleb's footstep in the hall. She recognized his step. Now the particular weight and rhythm of it, and then a knock. Come in, she said. He came in and sat in the chair near the window. He looked at her with the steady, undemanding attention that was his primary mode of being present. You did well in there, he said. Calloway did well in there. You gave him something to do well with. He paused. That speech you made when you walked in. Did you rehearse it? In my head. On horseback. Approximately 40 times. Something moved in his face that was not quite a smile, but was structurally related to one. It landed. It needed to. She looked at him. What happens now? Honestly, the federal inquiry buys time and legitimacy. Cross will fight it. He has lawyers, and he has money, and he has 3 judges, 2 of which are not the one Calloway just telegraphed. It will take months, possibly longer. But it can't be quietly killed. Not a federal inquiry, not with those documents and a sitting federal judge involved. It becomes public record. Cross's methods become public record. The other claims he's taken become visible. He looked at her steadily. It won't be easy. I didn't ask for easy, she said. I asked for honest. Then honestly, you have a real chance. Better than real. He looked at the window. Birch, if Calloway's inquiry finds him alive, we bring him in as a witness. Yes, and if Greer is arrested on the bribery evidence in Ruth's papers, The auction is retroactively invalidated, she said. Which means the debt sale was illegal, which means she stopped, which means everything they built on it collapses. Yes, she sat with that for a moment. The architecture of it, the way justice when it actually functioned was not one dramatic moment, but a series of interlocking pieces that had to be assembled correctly in the right order with the right authority behind them. Thomas would have understood this, she said quietly. He was methodical. He would have liked Calloway. She paused. He would have liked you. Caleb was quiet. He would have had questions about your methods, she said with something small and real in her voice that was not quite humor, but came from the same place. He would have found the $65 alarming. It alarmed me too, Caleb said. Briefly. This time she actually laughed. It was short and surprised out of her, and it was the first real laugh he'd heard from her, and it sounded like someone coming briefly to the surface. William woke up at the sound of it and made an indignant noise, and they both looked at him, and the moment held the three of them in a hotel room in Pueblo. A federal inquiry filed a brass-sealed door between them and Harlan Cross and his lawyers and his bought judges, and this small person on the bed who did not know any of it and was primarily concerned with the injustice of interrupted sleep. Evelyn lifted him and held him against her shoulder and looked at Caleb. "What do we do while we wait?" she said. "While the inquiry moves, while Calloway works, we can't stay in Pueblo indefinitely." He looked at her. He had thought about this, she could tell. He had been thinking about it since the cabin, maybe since the creek. "You could go back to the cabin," he said. "Both of you. It's secure. It's off the main roads. Cross's people don't have an easy approach to it, and I know the terrain." He paused. "It's not a permanent solution, but it's a safe one while the legal process moves." She looked at him steadily. "You're inviting us to stay." "I'm stating a practical option." "Caleb." He met her eyes. "Are you inviting us to stay?" She said again, not letting him have the practical framing. A long pause. He was a man who did not say things he didn't mean, and she was asking him to say something specific and mean it. "Yes," he said. "I am." She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she looked down at William, who had found a fistful of her braid and was examining it with the intense scientific interest of a 4-month-old encountering something new. "He's going to need ground," she said. "His father wanted him to have ground." "There's ground at the cabin," Caleb said. "Good ground. The eastern field gets sun most of the day. The water from the upper creek runs clean year-round." "You've thought about that field." "I've had 8 years to think about it," he said. "I never had a reason to do anything with it." She looked at him. Something moved between them. Not a declaration, not a promise. Nothing that tried to be more than what it actually was. Which was two people who had come through something hard together and were standing on the other side of it, changed in ways they were only beginning to understand. "All right," she said. "We go back to the cabin." He nodded once, and then because she was a woman who had cried everything she had and rebuilt herself out of what was left, and because some things are too important for indirectness, she said, "I'm not going back as a guest, Caleb." He looked at her. "I'm not going back as someone you're protecting, or someone who owes you, or someone in a temporary arrangement," she said. "If I go back as someone who belongs there, who has a stake in it, who is building something there alongside you with her own hands." She paused. "That's what I'm offering. That's what I'm asking. Is that what you're proposing?" The room was quiet. William had fallen asleep again with his fist still in her braid. Caleb looked at her for a long time with those gray eyes that had read landscape and weather and human intention for years and knew the difference between what people said and what they meant. "Yes," he said. "That is exactly what I'm proposing." 3 weeks later, Aldous Birch was found in a mining camp 40 miles east of Crestfall, alive, held under informal detention by 2 men in Cross's employ who had badly underestimated how long a federal inquiry could reach. Calloway's deputies brought him out on a Tuesday morning. He walked to the wagon, under his own power, asked for coffee, and when he'd had it, asked for the Harper file. Magistrate Greer was formally charged with bribery and corruption 6 days after that. He resigned before the arraignment. The Territorial Commissioner's Office suspended his judgments pending review, which meant the auction, the debt sale. The whole legal machinery that had put Evelyn Harper barefoot on a platform was suspended pending the same review. Garrett was arrested at the Colorado border trying to reach Denver. He was carrying correspondence from Harlan Cross that Cross's lawyers would spend the next 8 months trying to have excluded from evidence unsuccessfully. Harlan Cross himself was indicted on federal charges of land fraud conspiracy and criminal bribery the following spring. The federal judge Calloway had telegraphed turned out to have been waiting for exactly this package of evidence for longer than anyone had known. The case moved faster than Evelyn had dared hope. It moved with the particular momentum of a thing that has been ready to happen and has finally found its footing. The Harper land claim was formally confirmed in Evelyn Harper's name on a Thursday afternoon. Calloway sent word by telegram to the relay station in Crestfall, and Ruth Waller rode it up the mountain herself. Evelyn was in the east field when Ruth arrived, not gardening exactly more, walking the boundary of the cleared area with the careful attention of someone planning what comes next. Caleb was at the far end of the field, working at something structural she'd asked him to build, doing it with the same unhurried competence he brought to everything. Ruth dismounted and held out the telegram. Evelyn read it, read it again, stood very still in the east field with the summer sun on her face, and the mountains above her, and the sound of William sleeping in the cabin, and the sound of Caleb's work at the far end of the field. Then she looked up. "Caleb," she called. He stopped and looked at her across the field. Even at that distance, she could read his posture, the particular quality of his attention when it was directed at her. She held up the telegram. He set down what he was working on and walked across the field toward her, steady and unhurried, the way he moved through everything. He took the paper, read it, looked up. Ruth was watching them both from her horse with the expression of a woman who has done something worth doing and is allowing herself a quiet moment of satisfaction about it. "It's done," Evelyn said. "Yes," he said. "Thomas's land." "Your land," he said. "William's land." She looked at him. He held the telegram out, and she took it back and she folded it carefully along its creases, the way she folded Thomas's letter, the way she kept the things that mattered. She was not the woman who had stood barefoot on those auction planks 8 months ago. That woman had existed, had been real, had suffered, had not broken, and she had carried that woman here and somewhere along the way on a mountain road with a baby, and $65 worth of gold, and a man who said what he meant and meant what he said. She had become someone else. Someone who had kept the stubbornness and the love and the refusal to quit, and built something new around them. The West did not give things back. She knew that. The West took and kept and moved on without apology. But sometimes, rarely expensively, through the specific combination of documented evidence and the right federal authority and people like Ruth and Clara and May and Calloway, who believed the law should mean something, sometimes you could take something back. She had taken it back. Caleb stood beside her in the east field, and the summer light came down on the land that had cost everything and was now finally, completely, irrevocably hers. Ruth touched her hat brim. "I'll ride back before dark," she said. "Tell Clara it's done when you get a chance. She'll want to know." "I will," Evelyn said. "Thank you, Ruth, for everything." Ruth looked at them both for a moment with something in her expression that wasn't sentiment, but was its more durable cousin. Then she turned her horse and rode back down the mountain. Evelyn and Caleb stood in the field. "What do you want to build here?" she said. "In this field." "What do you want to build?" She looked at the ground. Good ground, he'd said. He'd been right. She could see it. She'd walked every foot of it in the last 3 weeks, and she could see what it could hold, what it could grow, what kind of roots it could sustain. "Something permanent," she said. "Something that's still standing when William's old enough to work it himself." "Then that's what we build," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. The mountain stood above them, enormous and indifferent, the way only permanent things can afford to be. And below it, two people stood on ground that had been fought for and found and legally confirmed, and was now as of a Thursday afternoon in the summer of 1884, the foundation of something that had not existed 6 months ago and would not stop existing now. William Harper had land. His mother had made sure of it, and she had not done it alone.